"I think I'll go and meet her," said Alice, for, though the flowers were interesting enough, she felt that it would be far grander to have a talk with a real queen. "You can't possibly do that," said the rose. "I should advise you to walk the other way." This sounded nonsense to Alice, so she said nothing, but set off at once towards the Red Queen. To her surprise, she lost sight of her in a moment, and found herself walking in at the front door again. A little provoked, she drew back, and after looking everywhere for the Queen, whom she'd spied out at last a long way off, she thought she would try the plan this time of walking in the opposite direction. It succeeded beautifully. She had not been walking a minute before she found herself face to face with the Red Queen, in full sight on the hill she had been so long aiming at. "Where do you come from?" said the Red Queen, "and where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers all the time." Alice attended to all these directions and explained as well as she could that she had lost her way. "I don't know what you mean by your way," said the Queen. "All the ways about here belong to me. But why did you come out here at all?" she added in a kinder tone. "Curtsy when you're thinking what to say. It saves time." Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to disbelieve it. "I'll try it when I go home," she thought to herself, "the next time I'm a little late for dinner." "It's time for you to answer now," said the Queen, looking at her watch. "Open your mouth a little wider when you speak, and always say, 'Your Majesty.'" "I only wanted to see what the garden was like, Your Majesty." "That's right," the Queen said, patting her on the head, which Alice didn't like at all, "though when you say garden, I've seen gardens compared to with which this would look like a wilderness." Alice didn't dare to argue the point, but went on, "And I thought I'd try to find my way to the top of that hill." "When you say hill," the Queen interrupted, "I could show you hills in comparison with which you'd call that a valley." "No, I shouldn't," said Alice, surprised and contradicting her at last. "A hill can't be a valley, you know. That would be nonsense." The Red Queen shook her head. "You may call it nonsense if you like," she said, "but I've heard nonsense compared with which that would be as sensible as a dictionary." Alice curtsied again, as she was afraid from the Queen's tone that she was a little offended, and they walked on in silence till they got to the top of the little hill. For some minutes Alice stood without speaking, looking out in all directions over the country. In a most curious country it was. There were a number of little tiny brooks running straight across it from side to side, and the ground between was divided up into squares by a number of little green hedges that reached from brook to brook. "I declare it's marked out just like a large chessboard," Alice said at last. "There ought to be some men moving about somewhere." "And so there are," she said in a tone of delight, and her heart began to beat quickly with the excitement as she went on. "It's a great huge game of chess that's being played all over the world. If this is a world at all, you know. Oh, what fun it is! How I wish I was one of them. I wouldn't mind being a pawn, if only I might join, though of course I should like to be a queen best." She glanced rather shyly at the real Queen as she said this, but her companion only smiled pleasantly and said, "That's easily managed. You can be the White Queen's pawn, if you'd like, as Lily's too young to play, and you're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be a queen." Just at this moment, somehow or other, they began to run. Alice never could quite make out, in thinking about it afterwards, how it was they began. All she could remember is that they were running hand in hand, and the Queen went so fast that it was all she could do to keep up with her. And still the Queen kept crying, "Faster, faster," but Alice felt she could not go faster, and she had not breath left to say so. The most curious part of the whole thing was that the trees and the other things around them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. "I wonder if all the things move along with us," thought poor puzzled Alice, and the Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, "Faster, don't try to talk." Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she would never be able to talk again. She was getting so much out of breath, and still the Queen cried, "Faster, faster," and dragged her along. "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly there," the Queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they ran on for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears and almost blowing her hair off her head, she fancied. "Now, now!" cried the Queen. "Faster, faster!" And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet, till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The Queen propped her up against a tree and said kindly, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "Of course it is," said the Queen. "What would you have it?" "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you generally get somewhere else, if you ran very fast for a long time as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the Queen. "Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do just to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." "I'd rather not try, please," said Alice. "I'm quite content to stay here, only I am so hot and thirsty." "I know what you'd like," said the Queen good-naturedly, taking out a little box out of her pocket. "Have a biscuit?" Alice thought it would not be civil to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it as well as she could, and it was very dry, and she thought she had never been so nearly choked in all her life. "While you're refreshing yourself," said the Queen, "I'll just take the measurements." And she took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked in inches, and began measuring the ground and sticking little pegs in here and there. "At the end of 2 yards," she said, putting a peg to mark the distance, "I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit?" "No, thank you," said Alice. "One's quite enough." "Thirst quenched, I hope?" said the Queen. Alice didn't know what to say to this, but luckily the Queen did not wait for an answer, but went on. "At the end of 3 yards I shall repeat them, for fear of you forgetting them. And at the end of 4 I shall say goodbye. And at the end of 5 I shall go." She had got all the pegs in by this time, and Alice looked on with great interest as she returned to the tree, and then began slowly walking down the row. At the 2-yard peg she faced round and said, "A pawn goes 2 squares in its first move, you know. So you'll get very quickly through the 3rd square, by railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty. But you'll make no remark?" I didn't know I had to make one just then," Alice faltered out. "You should have said, 'It's extremely kind of you to tell me all this.' However, we'll suppose it said. The 7th square is all forest. However, one of the knights will show you the way. And in the 8th square we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun." Alice got up and curtsied and sat down again. At the next peg the Queen turned again, and this time she said, "Speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are." She did not wait for Alice to curtsy this time, but walked on quickly to the next peg, which returned for a moment and said goodbye, and then hurried on to the last. How it happened Alice never knew, but exactly as she came to the last peg she was gone. Whether she vanished into the air, or whether she ran quickly into the wood, and she can run very fast, thought Alice. There was no way of guessing, but she was gone, and Alice began to remember that she was a pawn, and that it would soon be time for her to move. Chapter 3. Looking-Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe in hopes of being able to see a little further. Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm on the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody's ever seen bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood silently watching one of them that was bustling about among the bushes, poking its proboscis into them, just as if it were a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant, as Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her breath away at first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with roofs taken off and stalks put to them, and what quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down and... No, I won't just yet, she went on, checking herself, just as she was beginning to run down the hill, and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away, and what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I shall say, "Oh, I like it well enough." Here came the favorite little toss of the head, only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so. "I think I'll go down the other way," she said after a pause, "and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get on to the 3rd square." So with this excuse she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of the 6 little brooks. "Tickets, please," said the guard, putting his head in at the window. In a moment everybody was holding out a ticket. They were all about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. "Now then, show your ticket, child," the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice. And a great many voices all said together, like the chorus of a song, thought Alice, "Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth 1,000 pounds a minute." "I'm afraid I haven't got one," Alice said in a frightened tone. "There wasn't a ticket office where I came from." And again the chorus of voices went on. There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land is worth 1,000 pounds an inch. "Don't make excuses," said the guard. "You should have bought one from the engine driver." And once more the crowd of voices went on with, "The man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth 1,000 pounds a puff." Alice thought to herself, then there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken, but to her great surprise they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth 1,000 pounds a word. "I shall dream about 1,000 pounds tonight, I know I shall," thought Alice.